During our annual family dinner, my grandson mocked, "There's no place for old people anymore." I didn't argue. I handed him a gift box and quietly vanished. 30 minutes later, he called me in a panic because inside was a shocking gift he never expected. They always say getting older is like becoming invisible, but I never really believed it until I was standing in my own kitchen, carving a rosemary roast for people who barely looked up from their phones. My name is Margaret Green, Maggie to most, and if someone had told me a few years ago that I'd be where I am now, I wouldn't have believed them either. But life has a funny way of peeling the truth back slowly, like wallpaper you didn't realize was already curling at the corners. It started like any other year. The house smelled like cinnamon and garlic. My table was set with the good plates I only bring out once a year, and the fire crackled just the way Robert used to like it, low and steady. This was my tradition, the annual family dinner, held every February without fail since Jenna was a child. My daughter Jenna, now 43 and a busy interior designer, always said she didn't have the space to host it herself. That was fine. I liked doing it. At least I used to. I had everything prepared. Homemade rolls cooling by the window. Lemon bars stacked neatly under a glass dome. And a bottle of red wine I'd been saving for the right occasion. It was supposed to feel warm and full and familiar. It was supposed to feel like family. But something had shifted. Something in the air, in the way they walked through the door like it wasn't mine, like they were visitors to a place they no longer saw as home. Jenna arrived first, juggling her phone and handbag like always. Her new boyfriend, Blake, a man whose ego entered a room before he did, was right behind her. She gave me a rushed kiss on the cheek. "Smells good, Mom," she said, already halfway to the couch. She didn't even take off her shoes. Eli, my 21-year-old grandson, came in last. Tall, sharp jaw, dressed like he belonged in a GQ ad. He's in his 3rd year at NYU, studying business, though he rarely calls unless he needs something. I used to think we were close. When he was little, he'd help me knead dough in the kitchen, flour on his cheeks, asking 1,000 questions a minute. Now he barely glanced up as he strolled in, phone glued to his hand. I carved the roast in silence, smiling like I always did, because that's what I'd trained myself to do. I caught snippets of their conversation. Blake talking about some startup that just got funding, Jenna complaining about a client who changed her mind 3 times on a backsplash. Eli was laughing at something on his screen, fingers flying as he typed. And then it happened. He looked up for half a second, enough to see me struggling a little with the carving knife, and said with a laugh, "There's really no space for old people at family gatherings anymore." Just like that, with a grin, like he was saying something clever. Blake chuckled. Jenna smirked but said nothing. No one corrected him. No one even paused. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just stood there with the knife in my hand, the scent of rosemary filling the air, and something inside me went terribly, utterly still. It wasn't the words, it was the ease of them. The carelessness. Like I was just some prop in the background of their lives. They didn't know that I had paid over $65,000 for Eli's education. That I sold Robert's old motorcycle collection piece by piece, bikes he restored with his own hands before cancer took him. They didn't know that I drained most of my emergency fund to cover what Jenna couldn't. And I never asked them to know. I never said a word because I thought love didn't need receipts. I kept thinking one of them would notice. That someone would say, "That's not funny." Or, "Mom, are you okay?" But the silence was louder than anything. So I did something I'd never done before. I walked away. I placed the knife down, wiped my hands on my apron, and stepped out the back door. I didn't say a word. I didn't slam anything. I just left. Not for drama, not for attention, but because I had to breathe. Because if I had stayed one more second, I would have shattered in front of them, and I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing the damage. The night air was cold and crisp. I stood by the porch steps, staring at the sky, wondering when exactly I had stopped being seen. When I had shifted from being the woman they turned to just the woman who made dinner. When had I become a burden? When had I become so easy to mock? Inside my coat pocket was a check. I had planned to give it to Eli after dessert. Another $6,500, enough to cover books, housing, and whatever else he might need for spring semester. He never asked for it, but I knew he needed it. I always knew. I pulled it out, held it in my gloved hands. And right there, in the dim glow of the back porch light, I tore it in half. Then again. Then into smaller and smaller pieces until the wind carried them away like ashes. I didn't go back inside. I walked to my car, sat there for a moment staring at my own front door, and then drove off. No one followed. No one called. Not that night. Not the next day either. They didn't know that was the moment everything changed. Back at home, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the fireplace. The roast would go cold, the lemon bars untouched. I thought of all the years I had spent making this dinner perfect. All the late nights sewing Eli's Halloween costumes, babysitting so Jenna could work overtime, all the quiet ways I had held this family together. And in that silence, something new settled in. Not anger. Not sadness. Clarity. They didn't love me. Not really. They loved what I gave. And maybe, just maybe, it was time I stopped giving. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the fire burn down to soft orange coals and listened to the quiet of my own house. I had built this home with Robert, painted every wall with my own hands, stitched curtains, planted roses. And somewhere along the line, I had faded into the background of my own story. But not anymore. That night, I made a promise. To myself. To the woman I used to be. They may have stopped seeing me, but I would learn to see myself again. And this time, I wouldn't ask for permission. The next morning, I woke up before the sun, like I always did. But this time, I didn't head straight to the kitchen. I didn't start the coffee, didn't heat up leftovers, didn't touch the dishes left in the sink from the night before. I sat at the edge of my bed and stared at the window. Outside, the sky was just beginning to lighten, that pale gray before the blue settles in. It was quiet, too quiet. And yet, for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like filling the silence. I thought they would call. Even just a text. Maybe Jenna would send one of those short, rushed messages. Sorry, Mom. Eli was just joking. Hope you're okay. But the phone stayed still. No vibrations. No rings. The longer the silence stretched, the louder the truth became. They hadn't noticed I left. Or worse, they had, and didn't care. I made myself a cup of tea. Real tea, the good kind with fresh lemon and honey. And I sat at the kitchen table staring at the place cards I'd made for the dinner. Jenna's had little gold trim. Eli's had a hand-drawn book beside his name. He used to love reading when he was little. I used to write Professor Eli on his notebooks just to make him laugh. Now he didn't even look me in the eye. I remembered the way he said it. There's really no space for old people at family gatherings anymore. The way he laughed like I wasn't even in the room. Like I was the punchline, not the person who paid for his textbooks, his dorm room, even his flight home for the holidays last year when Jenna said she couldn't swing it. It wasn't just the money. It was everything else. All those years I'd rearranged my life to help them. When Jenna's marriage fell apart and she was trying to rebuild, who moved in to help raise Eli? I did. I was there for school pickups, late-night fevers, science fair volcanoes. I was there for everything. Quiet, reliable, always showing up. And slowly they had stopped seeing me. I remembered the first time I felt it. It wasn't a big moment. It was subtle, easy to ignore if I hadn't been paying attention. Last fall, I dropped by Jenna's house to bring over a fresh loaf of banana bread, Eli's favorite when he was a kid. I had wrapped it in foil, still warm, and thought it might be nice to surprise him while he was home from school. When he opened the door, he barely smiled. He was on the phone, laughing with someone. He said into the phone, "Oh, my grandma just showed up with banana bread. So retro, right?" Then he laughed and stepped aside without looking at me. Retro. Like I was a dusty record player or an old typewriter. I told myself it was nothing. Just a joke. Just Eli being young. But it hurt. That day, Jenna wasn't home. She was out on a date, he said, with that yoga guy who turned out to be Blake. I sat with Eli for 15 minutes. Tried to ask him about school. He gave me short answers. One-word replies. His eyes never really left his phone. When I stood to leave, he didn't hug me. Didn't even walk me to the door. That was the start of the unraveling. Thanksgiving was next. Jenna insisted on hosting. "You've done it enough, Mom," she said. "You shouldn't work so hard." But I knew what she meant. I was being nudged aside. I still brought my sweet potato casserole, the one with brown sugar crumble that everyone used to fight over. I wore my best green cardigan. Robert always said it made my eyes pop, and brought a little centerpiece for the table. No one said a word about any of it. They praised Blake's smoked turkey, raved about Jenna's store-bought cranberry chutney. When I offered to say grace, Jenna waved me off. "Let's just eat," she said. "Before it gets cold." During the meal, Eli joked about how old people don't understand TikTok, and Blake laughed like it was the funniest thing in the world. I smiled like always. But inside, I was shrinking. After dinner, while they watched football, I stood in the kitchen doing the dishes alone. No one offered to help. I dropped a plate. It shattered on the floor. Jenna didn't even look up. Just leave it, Mom, she said, annoyed. It's not a big deal. But it was. To me it was. I bent down, knees aching, hands trembling, and picked up the pieces one by one. That was when I realized I was no longer part of the family. I was just the help, the cook, the woman who brought the casserole and left quietly. The next morning, I got an email from a store advertising Black Friday deals. Headphones Eli wanted, a leather tote Jenna had pointed out, concert tickets they hinted at. I started making my usual gift list, the one I always made this time of year. But I paused. What was I giving to people who didn't even see me? The house felt different after that. I moved slower. I stopped humming when I cooked. The photos I used to print and hang sat in a pile on the table untouched. Even my roses, my pride and joy, began to wilt. I forgot to water them. Just didn't have the energy. One day I stood by the window, watching the bare branches outside, and realized I couldn't remember the last time Eli had called me. Really called, not texted, not sent a group message. Called to ask how I was doing. And that's when it hit me. I had built my worth on being useful. I had confused giving with being valued. I kept thinking if I did more, gave more, they'd remember how much I mattered. But they didn't. And they wouldn't. Because they didn't see me as a person anymore. They saw me as background. And I wasn't going to fade out like that. That week, I logged into the bank account I'd created for Eli's education. There was still a little over $12,000 left. Money I'd squirreled away from birthday checks I never cashed, small bonuses from the hospital, even Robert's last pension deposit before he passed. It was supposed to carry Eli through graduation. Instead, I closed the account. I visited the local community foundation, the one that offers scholarships to first-generation students. I sat across from a woman with soft eyes and explained I wanted to fund a scholarship in Robert's memory. She asked if I wanted to name a beneficiary. I smiled and said, yes. But not anyone I'm related to. That evening, I returned every single Christmas gift I'd already bought. The earrings for Jenna. The cologne for Blake. The custom pen Eli had asked for. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because it was time. Time to stop giving pieces of myself to people who never looked up long enough to say thank you. Back at home, I pulled out an old box from the back of the closet. Inside were photo albums, crayon drawings, receipts from birthdays and back-to-school shopping trips. Tucked in one corner was a yellowed envelope with Robert's handwriting. It said, "For Maggie when you forget your own light." I didn't open it right away. I just held it. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something new. Not joy, not sadness. A flicker. Like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't lost yet. I didn't open the envelope that night. I placed it gently on my nightstand, beside my reading glasses and the ceramic dish that still held Robert's old cufflinks. I wanted to wait until the house was quiet enough, still enough, for me to really hear what he might have written. It had been years since I'd seen his handwriting. Just seeing those bold, slanted letters again made something ache in my chest. The next morning, I woke up before dawn again. The sky outside was covered in fog, like the world itself hadn't made up its mind to begin the day. I wrapped myself in my shawl, poured some tea, and sat on the edge of the bed. I held the envelope for a long time before finally opening it. The letter was short, but it said everything I needed to hear. "My Maggie," it began. "If you're reading this, I imagine you're feeling unseen. You always did so much for everyone else, often without thanks. But you have to remember, love, that your worth isn't tied to their recognition. You are the roots. And even when no one notices the roots, they're what holds the tree upright. Don't let them make you forget who you are." I read it 3 times. The third time I read it out loud, quietly, just to hear his words in the air again. I closed my eyes and let the warmth of that truth sink in. And that's when I made up my mind. I wasn't going to be the background anymore. I wasn't going to chase after people who only saw me when they needed something. I'd been giving to the wrong people for too long. I needed to find where I mattered again. That week, I drove to the old children's hospital where I had worked for more than 30 years. I hadn't been back since I retired, not really. I always meant to, but life got busy. The volunteer coordinator, Julia, still remembered me. "Maggie Green," she said with a wide smile. "I was just telling someone about your pirate story times." We walked through the halls. The walls were still painted with bright murals, sailing ships, castles, trees with smiling owls. But some of the corners looked tired. The reading nook was half empty, crayons broken in the bins, blankets worn thin. I asked Julia what they needed most. She looked at me with hopeful eyes. "Honestly? Books. Art supplies. Volunteers who actually show up. I smiled. Well, I'm here now. That afternoon, I wrote a check with part of the money I'd gotten from the returned Christmas gifts. Not the full amount, I didn't want to make a scene, but enough to fill those shelves, replace the old beanbags, restock the paints and pencils. And I signed up to volunteer on Tuesday afternoons. I walked out of that hospital feeling lighter than I had in months. Not because I gave something, but because I had given it where it was needed, where it was seen. Back at home, I began writing again. I'd always dreamed of writing a memoir. Stories from the ER, raising Jenna on a nurse's salary, falling in love with Robert in the break room over stale coffee and jelly donuts. I dug out my old laptop, dusted it off, and opened a blank document. At the top I typed, "The Quiet Woman, Stories No One Asked For." The words came slowly at first, but then they started to pour out. I didn't worry about grammar or structure. I just wrote. About the time I stayed up all night sewing Eli's third-grade play costume. About the time Jenna came home crying after her first heartbreak, and I sat with her on the bathroom floor until sunrise. About the time Robert snuck a kitten into the house, even though we both agreed we weren't pet people. Each story stitched me back together. And then something unexpected happened. Jenna called. It was late on a Thursday. I had just come back from the hospital, my hands still smelling faintly of crayon and hand sanitizer. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. Her voice was cautious. "Hey, Mom, you've been kind of quiet." I didn't say anything. "I just wanted to check in," she added quickly. "We haven't heard from you." I took a breath. "I've been busy." There was a pause on her end, a silence I didn't rush to fill. "Well," she said after a moment, "Eli mentioned you seemed distant. He's a little confused." Confused? The boy who told a room full of people that old folks don't belong at family gatherings? That boy. I didn't say that. I just replied calmly, "I imagine this is the first time he's had to wonder what I'm thinking." Another long pause. "Well, okay," she said, her voice tight. "I just wanted to check." I thanked her and hung up. The old me would have softened the moment, would have tried to smooth things over, made her comfortable again. But not this time. This time, I let the discomfort sit. Because sometimes silence is the best teacher. The next week, I received a letter from the Community Foundation. They'd awarded the first scholarship in Robert's name. The recipient was a young woman named Tamika, the daughter of a waitress and a mechanic. She wrote, "Thank you for believing in someone like me. No one ever has." I cried reading that. Not from pain, but from fullness. I had spent so many years pouring love into people who only saw it as expected. And now, finally, I had given to someone who saw it as a gift. I was no longer desperate to matter to people who had forgotten me. I was no longer trying to squeeze into spaces where I wasn't welcome. One evening, I stood in my garden with pruning shears in hand. The rose bushes were mostly bare now, the stems sharp and dry. Winter had left its mark. But here and there, I saw the faintest signs of green. Tiny buds pushing their way out. It made me think. Maybe I wasn't dying. Maybe I was just resting. Recovering. Maybe this season of invisibility wasn't the end. Maybe it was the beginning of something I hadn't even imagined yet. And with that thought, I clipped away the dead leaves, readying the soil for spring. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't grieving. I was rebuilding. Quietly. Steadily. And this time for me. After the roses, I turned to the rest of the house. It had always been neat. Robert used to tease me about my habit of labeling drawers, but now it felt different. Like each room held a breath I'd been holding in for years. I started going through the closets, drawers, even the attic. I found boxes of old photographs, Eli's preschool drawings, Jenna's handmade Mother's Day cards, Robert's watch still ticking quietly in the back of a drawer. And then I found something unexpected. The deed to the house, folded and tucked between old tax files. My name was on it in bold black ink. No joint ownership, no co-signers. Just me. Maggie Green. That moment stopped me. I stood there, holding that paper, and for the first time in a long while, I remembered just how much I had built, just how far I had come. I owned this house. Every inch of it. The walls, the windows, the floor where Eli took his first steps, the porch where Robert used to drink coffee at sunrise. I had paid every mortgage, planted every tree, and painted every wall with my own 2 hands. And suddenly the idea of giving that space, my sanctuary, freely to people who barely acknowledged me felt wrong. I had spent so much of my life offering myself like an open door. It was time I changed the locks, both literally and emotionally. So I did. I didn't announce it. I didn't make a show. I called a local locksmith and had the house rekeyed. When the man asked me if I wanted to keep any of the old keys active, I shook my head. No, I said. Fresh start. And it was. A quiet, symbolic act, but one that mattered more than I could explain. Days passed. Peacefully. I wrote more of my memoir, returned to the children's hospital every week, and spent time in my garden preparing it for the next bloom. I even joined a local book club. Small things, steady things. No one was demanding my time. No one was draining me. For the first time, I wasn't operating on obligation. I was choosing. Then, about 2 weeks later, I saw Jenna's name flash on my phone again. I let it ring the first time. She didn't leave a voicemail. A few days later, she called again. I answered this time, not because I was ready to make things easy, but because I was ready to listen without losing myself. Her voice was softer this time. Hi, Mom. I stopped by the house the other day. Wanted to drop off something for you, but the key didn't work. I let the silence linger. I guess I was surprised, she added, her voice hesitant. I had the locks changed, I said simply. Oh, she paused. Why? I needed a clean slate, I said. This is my home. I needed to make it feel like mine again. I could almost hear her blinking in surprise. She was used to the version of me that smoothed everything over, filled every silence with comfort. But that Maggie was resting now. Eventually, she cleared her throat. Eli's been asking about you. I'm sure he has. He doesn't really know how to apologize. You know how he is. I did know. But knowing didn't mean I had to excuse it anymore. She continued. He said he thinks you're upset about what he said at the dinner. That it was just a joke. It wasn't the joke, I said, keeping my voice even. It was the truth behind it. The way no one stood up. The way no one noticed when I left. Jenna was quiet for a long time. Then she said, he's not a bad kid, Mom. He's just young. Then let him grow, I said. But I won't fund that growth anymore. Another pause. You mean the tuition? Yes. I closed the account. She didn't try to argue. I think she knew it would be useless. That conversation ended with no hugs, no resolution. Just the weight of change sitting between us. And I let it sit there. I had always rushed to clean up the emotional messes, but not anymore. This time they would have to do their own sweeping. A few nights later, I sat by the fireplace with a cup of tea and my laptop open. I had just finished a chapter about Robert's last summer. The way he insisted on fixing up that old truck, even when he could barely hold the wrench. I missed him fiercely. Not just because of how he loved me, but because of how he saw me. Even when I was worn down and tired, even when I doubted myself, he never did. He saw my strength even when I couldn't. And maybe that's what hurt the most about Eli and Jenna. That they didn't just forget my sacrifices. They forgot me. A few days later, I received a letter from the foundation again. Tamika, the girl who received the scholarship in Robert's name, had sent a handwritten note. Dear Mrs. Green, I wanted to say thank you. I used to think college was just a dream for other people. People with connections, money, or luck. But your gift changed everything. I'm taking my first business class next week, and I'll think of you every time I walk through those doors. Not just because of the check, but because someone I didn't even know believed in me. Thank you for seeing me. I sat with that letter for a long time. She was right. That's all I ever wanted, for someone to see me. Not what I gave, not what I could offer, but me. That night, I stood in the spare bedroom where Eli used to sleep. The bedding was still fresh, the pillow fluffed. On the dresser sat a small wooden box that Robert had made for Eli's 8th birthday. Inside were little trinkets, old baseball cards, a pressed penny from a zoo trip, a tiny keychain that said, #OneGrandma. I ran my fingers over it. It used to mean something. Maybe it still could. But only if they came back to me. Not out of guilt, not for money, but because they finally saw me again. It was the end of March when Jenna texted me one simple line. Eli wants to talk. Only if you're open to it. I didn't respond right away. I thought about it for a day, then another. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't desperate either. Eventually I replied. Tell him I'll meet him in the garden. Thursday. Noon. I chose the garden on purpose. It was neutral. Open. A place of growth. Just like me. Thursday came with the kind of morning I always loved. Bright, crisp air. Sun gently warming the porch. And a faint breeze that made the wind chimes sing like they still remembered Robert's hands hanging them up. I had set out 2 chairs near the rose bushes, the ones I'd just finished pruning last week. The early blooms were just beginning to stretch open, tiny and soft, pink and red. They looked fragile, but they were anything but. They had survived winter. Just like me. I made tea, poured it into a flask, brought 2 mugs outside. No sugar, just lemon. Eli never liked it too sweet. At exactly noon, I heard the side gate creak. I didn't get up. I waited. He walked in slower than usual. No swagger this time. No phone in hand. He looked taller somehow, but smaller too. He wasn't dressed up, just jeans and a plain jacket, like he knew this wasn't the time to perform. "Hi, Grandma," he said, voice soft. A little unsure. I nodded toward the other chair. "Sit." He sat, folding his hands in his lap, looking everywhere but at me. For a moment, we just listened to the birds. Then he spoke. "I read your article," he said. My heart paused. "What article?" He reached into his pocket and pulled out folded pages. From the hospital's newsletter. One of the nurses posted it on her blog. It was titled "The Quiet Woman." Why I stopped showing up where I wasn't seen. I blinked. I had written it as a personal reflection and given permission to publish it locally, but I didn't think he'd ever see it. I didn't think he cared to. He continued. I read it twice. The second time slower. And it made me cry. I didn't say anything. I waited. "I didn't realize," he said, looking at his shoes. "How much you did. I mean, I always knew you were around. You cooked. You helped. But I didn't. I didn't see all of it. Not really. Not until I saw it on the page." His voice cracked. He didn't try to cover it. "I thought I was being funny," he said. "At the dinner. But now. I get it. You weren't just in the room. You were the one who built the room." That hit something in me. A tenderness I had carefully packed away. "I'm sorry, Grandma," he said. "I really am. I know sorry doesn't fix everything, but I need to say it anyway." I looked at him for a long time. His eyes weren't defiant. They weren't defensive. They were open. Raw. He looked like the little boy who used to sneak into my room at night after a bad dream. "I appreciate that," I said finally. Truly. He looked hopeful. Like maybe this was the moment where everything returned to how it used to be. But I didn't let him settle there. "But I need you to understand something, Eli. I've changed. Not to punish you. Not because I'm angry. But because I had to." He nodded slowly. "I can love you," I said, "and still have boundaries. I can forgive you and still choose not to fund your future." His eyes watered again, but this time he didn't look away. "I understand," he whispered. "I really do." We sat in silence after that. A comfortable one. The breeze picked up, rustling the roses. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "This was the last check I wrote for you," I said, handing it to him. "It's shredded. I tore it up that night. But I kept the pieces to remind myself of something important, that I don't need to buy love." He didn't take the envelope. He just stared at it, as if it were a mirror. "I'm going to be okay," I said. "With or without being needed." He nodded again, eyes glossy. After a while, he stood. I didn't offer a hug. I didn't reach for him. But before he turned to leave, he said, "You're the strongest person I know, Grandma. And I hope someday I can give to someone the way you gave to me." I smiled. Not wide. Not for show. Just enough. And then he walked away. I didn't watch him go. That evening, I sat alone on my porch, wrapped in my softest shawl. The sky shifted from pink to lavender, and the first stars blinked awake. The tea had gone cold in my cup, but I didn't mind. The stillness wasn't heavy anymore. It felt earned. I thought about Tamika probably prepping for her next midterm. I thought about Robert, whose love never made me question my place. And I thought about myself, the woman I was becoming now, not because I had been broken, but because I had decided to rebuild. Later that night, I returned to the binder I'd labeled months ago, The Quiet Woman. I flipped through the pages, stories about love, exhaustion, humor, heartbreak. I added one more chapter that night. Just a few paragraphs. A rose doesn't bloom because someone demands it. It blooms when it's ready. When the roots are strong and the season is right. I had spent years blooming for others. Now I was finally blooming for me. After Eli left the garden that day, something inside me settled. It wasn't resolution, not in the way stories usually end with hugs and promises, but it was something more honest. Real. I didn't expect the air to change or the phone to ring with apologies. And it didn't. But I had made peace with that. I had spent so much of my life bending myself into shapes that fit everyone else's expectations. Now I was finally unfolding back into my own. The next few weeks passed gently. I kept volunteering at the children's hospital. Every Tuesday, I read stories to the little ones in the corner of the reading room. One girl named Lila insisted I wear the pirate hat again, the same one I used back when Eli was 5. It had a bent feather and smelled a little like mothballs, but it made them laugh. And that laughter, real, loud, unfiltered, was worth more than any thanks I'd ever chased from my own family. I found that my days were fuller than they had been in years. Not because I was busier, but because I was more present. I'd take long walks around the neighborhood, stop to admire blooming dogwoods, or linger at the farmer's market just to chat with the vendors. No one expected anything from me. No one took me for granted. And slowly, I began to understand something I had forgotten. There was life beyond being needed. One Sunday afternoon, I received a letter from Tamika. Not an email, a real, handwritten letter. I recognized her neat, careful handwriting right away. Dear Mrs. Green, I wanted to tell you that I got an A on my first economics exam. I know it's just a grade, but for me, it felt like proof that I belong here. Your scholarship didn't just pay for tuition. It gave me a kind of confidence I never had before. My parents were crying when I told them about you. My mom said, "That woman must have the biggest heart in the world." And I think she's right. I sat at the kitchen table, holding that letter in both hands. My eyes welled up, but I didn't cry. Not out of sadness. Out of something far better. Recognition. Not from my family, but from someone who saw the real me. Who appreciated not the casserole, not the check, not the house, but my heart. It reminded me of something Robert used to say. You don't need a crowd to be meaningful. Just one person who really sees you. And Tamika saw me. Maybe better than Jenna or Eli ever had. I pinned the letter to my corkboard, right next to a faded photo of Robert in his garage, grease on his hands and that same lopsided grin he gave me on our wedding day. A few days later, something strange happened. Jenna showed up at my door. No text. No call. Just the sound of her car in the driveway and the knock that followed. I opened the door slowly, and there she was, holding a brown paper bag of groceries and wearing a smile that looked rehearsed. Thought I'd cook lunch, she said, holding up the bag like a peace offering. I hesitated, but I stepped aside and let her in. She moved around the kitchen like she remembered it well. I watched her pull out ingredients: pasta, spinach, goat cheese, pine nuts. Fancy but simple. She said she'd learned the recipe from a client. For a while we cooked in silence, the kind that was comfortable but cautious. Like walking across a floor that might still creak. Eli told me about the garden, she finally said, her back turned as she stirred the sauce. I waited. He said it wasn't what he expected. That you didn't yell. That you didn't forgive him with open arms. I sipped my tea. That's because I didn't. She turned around. You've changed. Yes, I said. I have. And then she surprised me. She sat down at the table and looked at me, really looked. Not with distraction, not through her phone, but with a face that was bare and real. I think I failed you, Mom, she said. Not just at the dinner, but for years. I took and never thought about what you needed. I didn't rush to reassure her. I didn't reach across the table. I just listened. I got so used to you being the strong one, the fixer, the woman who never asked for anything. I forgot you were a person. A woman who has dreams, feelings, limits. That stirred something deep inside me. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. I wanted to say thank you, she added. For everything. For raising Eli. For paying our bills. For being there even when I didn't deserve it. She didn't cry. Neither did I. But I saw a flicker of truth pass between us. I'm not asking to make things go back, she said. I just want to start again. If you'll let me. I looked at her, this woman I raised, who had once clung to my hand when she scraped her knee, who I stayed up with on nights when her world was crumbling. She had finally shown up. Not for help. Not for money. Just for me. We ate in silence, and afterward, she insisted on doing the dishes. I let her. When she left, she gave me a small hug. Not long. Not tight. But gentle. There was no promise that everything would be perfect. But it was enough. That night, I sat in my reading chair by the window, the light of the lamp warming my lap as I flipped through my memoir draft. I had written more than I ever expected. Not just about them, but about me. The quiet woman I used to be. The one who stood behind every photo, every meal, every crisis, but who finally stepped forward. I thought about all the women like me. The ones who cooked and cleaned and gave everything of themselves until there was nothing left. The ones who were told they were being dramatic when they spoke up. The ones who were called selfish when they set a boundary. We weren't selfish. We were tired. And we had earned the right to be seen. Later, I lit a candle and stood in the garden under the stars. The roses had bloomed wider. Stronger. Their petals layered and full, vibrant against the dark sky. I ran my fingers over a blossom and whispered to it like I used to whisper to Eli when he was small. You're doing just fine. Even if no one says it. You are enough. And maybe that was all I had ever needed to hear too. Just enough. Not loud, not grand. Just real. It's a strange thing coming back to yourself. For so long, I thought healing would look like fireworks or grand epiphanies, something you could mark on a calendar. But it doesn't. It comes quietly, in the spaces no one else sees. In the way your breath steadies in the morning. In the way your hands stop trembling when you say no. In the way you no longer shrink inside your own home. After that afternoon with Jenna, I didn't expect everything to change. And it didn't. She didn't call every day. Eli didn't suddenly become a doting grandson. But the silence that followed was different now. It wasn't abandonment. It was space. Space I had chosen, space I had shaped. And I was no longer afraid of it. One morning, as spring settled more confidently into the garden, I brewed myself a cup of dark roast, pulled on my sun hat, and sat at the patio table with my notebook. The sun was warm but not overbearing, the breeze sweet with the smell of soil and blossoms. I opened my journal and wrote a question at the top of a clean page. Who am I without them? Not bitterly. Not with sadness. Just curiosity. And then I wrote, I am a mother. I am a nurse. I am a gardener. I am a woman who once drove across the state to bring her daughter home after a car broke down. I am a woman who nursed her husband through his final months without once asking, why me? I am a woman who loves tea and Nat King Cole and the smell of lavender. I am a woman who gave and gave and gave until she finally gave to herself. By the time I finished, the page was full. And I felt full too. Not because I had all the answers, but because I had finally asked the right question. That same afternoon, I walked into the back room, the one I'd turned into a little writing corner, and opened my laptop. I added the final chapter to The Quiet Woman. It wasn't a goodbye or a lesson. It was a reminder that I was still here, that I had always been here, just waiting for the noise to quiet down long enough to be heard, even if it was only by myself. About a week later, I received another envelope from the Scholarship Foundation. Inside was a photograph of Tamika standing on the steps of her college, holding a binder and beaming like she had the whole world in her hands. She'd included a note. Mrs. Green, I spoke at the student welcome panel this week. I told them about the scholarship. I told them it wasn't just the money. It was the belief. You changed my life. I want to do that for someone else one day too. I held the picture in my hand and felt the kind of joy that doesn't ask for anything back. The kind that just is. Robert would have been proud. I could feel it. Not in a ghostly, mystical way, but in the certainty that comes from decades of love. He saw me, even when I couldn't. And now, finally, I was starting to see myself too. A few days after that, Jenna stopped by again. This time she didn't bring groceries or excuses. She brought a book. I thought you might like this, she said, holding it out. It was a hardcover, something about women reinventing themselves after 50. I took it, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I had to perform my gratitude. I smiled, not out of habit but out of sincerity. We sat in the living room, drinking tea, talking about simple things, the weather, the garden, a new client she was struggling with. It felt like a beginning, not a return to what we used to be, but something new. A relationship that wasn't built on need, but on choice. Before she left, she asked, "Can I bring Eli next time?" I paused, then nodded. "If he wants to come, he's welcome." She didn't push. Just hugged me again, a little tighter this time. And later, when the house was quiet again, I lit a candle in the kitchen and stood at the window, looking out over the garden. The roses were blooming now, soft and full and impossibly strong. I whispered to them the way I always had, as if they were listening. "You made it," I said. "We made it." The following week, I sent a small package to Tamika. Just a journal, wrapped in brown paper, with a note tucked inside. Write it all down. The things they didn't see. The things you thought were too small. Those are your roots. And they are everything. It wasn't signed Mrs. Green. It was signed Maggie. Because I had remembered who she was. The woman I was before I became the unpaid therapist, the emergency babysitter, the forgotten cook at the end of a too long table. The woman I was when I was in love, when I was fearless, when I dreamed of writing something that mattered, even if it only mattered to one person. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Jenna. Not at Eli. Not even at the years I had spent trying to prove I was enough. Those years taught me how deep I could love, how deeply I could hurt, and how fiercely I could come back. And maybe that's the point of it all. Not to stay soft so everyone else can stay comfortable, but to grow strong in the quiet, to bloom where no one expects it, To be the woman who walked away from a table that forgot her, and built a new one, just for herself. No more waiting to be seen. I see me now, and that's more than enough.